In the middle of the 18th and 19th century, when the slave trade was prevalent in the West, Russian Czar Nicholas was one of the few who dared to go against the masses. In a groundbreaking historical move, the Tsar outlawed the trade of African slaves in Russia. But was this the truth? Or was it all a beautifully packaged lie to lure in black people and profit from their labor? Somehow, beneath the veneer of promise lay a complex tapestry of experiences, where the shadows of racism lurked even in the heart of the communist state. While the Soviet Union promoted an image of a safe haven or paradise where black individuals were embraced and racism eradicated, the reality was different than many people would have imagined. Exploiting Africans for propaganda purposes, the Soviet regime grappled with deeply ingrained prejudices that persisted despite outward appearances of equality. This story of defiance and disillusionment finds its echoes in the experiences of individuals like Robert Robinson. A pivotal moment arrived when two white American workers launched a brutal assault on Robinson, fueled by weeks of animosity. Though justice was served with their conviction and deportation, Robinson found himself thrust into the spotlight as a local celebrity, his plight exploited for propaganda purposes. Black immigrants in Russia were fraught with a fearful anticipation of the unknown in this peculiar stance against racism in the Soviet Union. What would you have done in this situation? Many African Americans, like Robinson, found themselves ensnared in the complex web of discrimination and danger that lurked beneath the surface of Soviet society. However, as they grappled with the dual challenges of racism and systemic inequality, their lives teetered on the edge of peril. In this video, we'll discover the harrowing realities faced by black individuals in Russia and explore the pressing question: how dangerous is life for black people in Russia actually? Black immigrants in Russia were fraught with a fearful anticipation of the unknown in this peculiar stance against racism in the Soviet Union. What would you have done in this situation? Many African Americans, like Robinson, found themselves ensnared in the complex web of discrimination and danger that lurked beneath the surface of Soviet society. However, as they grappled with the dual challenges of racism and systemic inequality, their lives teetered on the edge of peril. In the 18th and 19th centuries, while much of Europe was deeply entrenched in the horrors of the slave trade, Russia stood apart by abstaining from this barbaric practice. However, this didn't mean that black people were fully embraced as equals. Instead, they were often seen through the lens of exoticism and curiosity. Russians viewed black people as exotic beings from distant lands, rather than as fellow human beings deserving of respect and dignity. This distorted perception led to the organization of various ethnographic exhibitions across Russia, where people from different African tribes and regions were put on display like exotic animals. These exhibitions took place in zoos, theaters, and circuses, treating black individuals as objects of fascination rather than individuals with their own identities and histories. It was a dehumanizing practice that reduced black people to mere spectacles for the amusement of the Russian public. Even esteemed individuals like Alexander Pushkin, whose great-grandfather Abraham Hannibal was of African descent, faced challenges in being recognized for their true heritage. Pushkin, often depicted as a white man in historical narratives, highlights the pervasive erasure of black identity in Russian society. This erasure perpetuated the myth of racial superiority and contributed to the marginalization of black people within Russian society. Following the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, Russia underwent a radical transformation under the banner of communism. With the establishment of a classless society, racism and discrimination were officially condemned as incompatible with Marxist principles of equality. Despite these progressive ideals, ethnic minorities, including black people, continue to face challenges and casual racism in Soviet society. However, the Soviet Union did provide a more welcoming environment for African Americans seeking refuge from the racial oppression rampant in the United States. The promise of a racially egalitarian society attracted thousands of African Americans to immigrate to the Soviet Union in the 1930s, seeking a haven from the discriminatory practices of Jim Crow segregation. Yet, even within this ostensibly egalitarian society, remnants of racial bias persisted. Black individuals were still regarded as other and faced subtle forms of discrimination in their daily lives. The Soviet Union's commitment to anti-racism was often more rhetoric than reality, as ethnic minorities continued to experience marginalization and prejudice despite official policies condemning discrimination. During the decline of the Soviet Union, marked by Gorbachev's reforms and the subsequent dissolution of the bloc, Russia underwent a period of profound and social political upheaval. With greater freedoms and the opening of previously restricted avenues for expression, nationalist sentiments and supremacist ideologies began to gain traction. Amidst economic distress and political uncertainty, Afro-Russians found themselves increasingly targeted by white supremacists and nationalists, who scapegoated them for the country's troubles. Racial prejudice and harassment became commonplace, with African Russians subjected to discrimination and violence in their daily lives. As the Soviet Union's egalitarian ideals faded into memory, a new era of racial tension emerged, marking a troubling shift in Russian society's attitudes towards its black population. In contemporary Russia, the exploitation of African migrants has emerged as a pressing human rights issue, underscoring the systemic inequalities and vulnerabilities faced by marginalized communities. Annually, thousands of Africans fall victim to fraudulent schemes promising false opportunities in Russia, only to find themselves deceived and stranded in a foreign land, stripped of their savings and legal status. These migrants are left destitute and vulnerable to exploitation by unscrupulous employers and traffickers. Compounding their plight is Russia's punitive immigration policies, which punish individuals lacking legal status, trapping migrants in a cycle of exploitation and poverty. Among the most vulnerable are Black women, who are disproportionately targeted by sex trafficking rings, lured under false pretenses and coerced into forced prostitution. Despite efforts to combat human trafficking and exploitation, the exploitation of African migrants persists as a grim reality in contemporary Russia, highlighting the urgent need for comprehensive reforms to protect the rights and dignity of all individuals, regardless of race or nationality. In today's Russia, tens of thousands of people of color, including Russian-born individuals of mixed heritage and immigrants from African and Caribbean countries, navigate a society marked by persistent prejudice and discrimination. Despite the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the rise of a purportedly egalitarian ethos, the experiences of Black individuals in Russia echo the legacy of discrimination that permeated the Soviet era. One such story is of Roy Ibanga, a university student who encountered racism in Bryansk, which mirrors the casual discrimination faced by Afro-Russians across the country. The incident involving a taxi driver's refusal to transport him due to his race underscores the prevalence of casual racism and xenophobia in everyday life. Roy's subsequent decision to document and share his experience reflects a growing awareness of racial injustice among Black Russians, many of whom grapple with similar forms of discrimination on a regular basis. Similarly, Isabel Castillo's upbringing in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk and subsequent relocation to Moscow and St. Petersburg exemplify the enduring impact of racial prejudice on the lives of Black Russians. From childhood experiences of being singled out and ostracized to adulthood encounters with discriminatory housing practices and workplace bias, Isabel's journey reflects the broader pattern of racial inequality and social exclusion faced by Black individuals in Russian society. The exploitation of African migrants in contemporary Russia serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing challenges faced by Black communities in the country. Deceived by false promises of opportunity and security, thousands of migrants find themselves trapped in precarious situations, vulnerable to exploitation and abuse. From fraudulent employment schemes to sex trafficking rings, the plight of African migrants underscores the intersection of racism, economic inequality, and human rights violations in modern Russia. In the same way, Elena L. Hussein's experiences as a Black Russian woman shed light on the complexity of identity and belonging in a society marked by racial prejudice. From ignorant remarks and microaggressions to outright discrimination, Elena's encounters with racism reflect a broader pattern of societal bias against individuals of African descent. Despite her resilience and self-assurance, Elena's experiences highlight the pervasive nature of racism in the Russian society and the urgent need for greater awareness and advocacy to combat racial injustice. While in other parts of the world, awareness is prevalent regarding racism, yet Russia doesn't follow the same script. Camila Ogan's perspective as a Russian Nigerian woman reveals the intersectionality of race, nationality, and gender in shaping experiences of discrimination in Russia, from childhood encounters with racism in her hometown to adulthood struggles with social exclusion in Moscow. Camila's journey underscores the multifaceted nature of racism and the challenges faced by Black women in navigating Russian society. Despite facing adversity, Camila remains resilient, determined to challenge stereotypes and promote understanding and inclusion in her community. Another such story of casual racism, Maxim Nikolsky, a journalist reflecting on his experiences with casual racism in Moscow, offers insights into the complexities of identity and belonging in contemporary Russia. From childhood encounters with overt racism to adulthood struggles with subtle forms of discrimination, Maxim's journey highlights the enduring legacy of racial prejudice in the Russian society. Despite the progress made in combating racism, Maxim acknowledges the ongoing difficulties faced by Black Russians and the need for continued efforts to promote equality and social justice. The stories shared here offer a glimpse into the diverse experiences of Black individuals in Russia and the enduring challenges they face in confronting racism and discrimination. Despite the progress made in recent years, systemic inequalities persist, perpetuating cycles of marginalization and exclusion for Black communities across the country. As Russia continues to grapple with issues of race and identity, it is imperative that the society confronts its legacy of racism and works towards building a more inclusive and equitable future for all its citizens. Only through collective action and solidarity can Russia fulfill its promise of equality and justice for every individual, regardless of race or ethnicity. While casual racism exists in Russia, systemic racism is more prevalent in the West. In Russia, individuals may encounter prejudice in everyday interactions, such as being denied service or facing derogatory remarks, as highlighted in the experiences of many Black migrants in the country. However, unlike the institutionalized discrimination seen in the West, Russia's racism tends to be more subtle and stems from ignorance rather than deeply ingrained societal structures. Nonetheless, this casual racism can still escalate, contributing to a climate where people of color feel marginalized and unwelcome. In turn, this may deter potential immigrants and perpetuate the small number of Black individuals in the country, exacerbating their sense of isolation and vulnerability. How do you think racism in Russia compares to racism in your country? If you found this exploration of Black history in Russia insightful and informative, consider subscribing to our channel for more thought-provoking content on Black history around the world. Make sure that you never miss out on future videos that delve into important and often overlooked aspects of Black experiences. Thank you.